Welcome to Watercolours with Caroline and a short lesson on mixing black, grey and dark colours. When I started taking watercolour lessons back in 1985, a long time ago, several instructors told me that watercolour painters don't use white paint, they don't use black paint. They use the white of the paper and they mix their own blacks. Well, many years later, I break the rules quite a lot. I use black ink, I use black acrylic, I use all kinds of things, Dr. P.H. Martin's white pencil, but I do love to mix my own dark colours, especially blacks and greys. And I think it's a great skill to learn because, you know, cats and birds and dogs and other animals, they're not just black. They reflect many colours. They have blues and browns and purples and all colours in their fur and feathers. So get your paints out and let's have a little mini lesson on mixing black. Okay, so let's try this out then, mixing black. Now, I suggest that you start off with an old brush for mixing because your brush gets quite distressed when you're picking up the colour. So use an old brush and use your good brushes for painting. I don't always remember that myself, but I try and remind myself that. Now, there's two ways you can do this. You can use cheaper paper, and the paper I'm going to do a little bit of the demonstrating on is Canson XL, which is a pulp paper. It's quite cheap. It's £140, but it's really not great for doing any wet or anything like that. If you want to get a good idea of what your colors are going to look like, I suggest you do them on good paper, the sort of paper that you'd usually use. And I use £140 Arches paper usually. And so that's what I've got here. I'm going to keep this little ring sort of pad here that I've made so that I have it as a reference tool with all of the colors. I can quickly look up what I need if I forget what I've mixed, because I do. I forget what I've mixed in a previous painting, and these will all be here for my reference. I've also done a page of ready mix blacks with lamp black and different ones that you can use with some tests on those. So I'll go over those later. But let's start out with the basics, put those behind me. So the basics really are, if you mix your three primary colors, a type of red, a type of yellow, and a type of blue, you will get a neutral color. And a neutral color means anything from black to a brown to a light gray, depending on how much red or yellow you use, depending on how much water you use. And whether you get a granulating sort of muddy black depends on whether you use granulating colors. And if you get a nice clear transparent black, then you use transparent colors to mix them. So I have a variety here. My favorite is ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and those are two granulating colors. So you have to be a little bit careful because they can make a muddy mix if you add too much else into them, but they do make a beautiful, quick, lovely black or gray. The three that I've got here that are pretty transparent and nice, deep, intense colors are Quinacridone Magenta, Azo Yellow, and Phthalo Blue. These are all M. Graham artist quality paints, and you are going to get a much deeper, more rich black if you use artist quality paints. If you're using a cheaper paint or a student paint, you're not going to get deep colors often or intense colors. So if you're trying to mix with, say, a Cotman paint, yours may look chalky or they may look very light. You may not be able to get the colors that I get. So think about that. Anyway, let's start off with those three, the Quinacridone Magenta, the Azo Yellow, and the Phthalo Blue. Now, if you don't have those, you could use a Quinacridone Rose if you don't have Quinacridone Magenta. You could use Alizarin Crimson, but Alizarin Crimson can fade over time. It can be one of those fugitive colors, so you have to be a little bit careful with that. And so do some other reds. Generally, if you can pick something with Quinacridone in its name, go for it because they are going to fade a lot less. Azo Yellow is my new favorite one by M. Graham, PY151. I like it because it's lovely and transparent and it's very kind of neutral. It's kind of yellow, right in the middle of cool and warm. It's just a great one. And Phthalo Blue is a staple. You really should have a Phthalo Blue in your collection because it's a lovely, clear, transparent, cool blue that's wonderful for mixing. I would say have an ultramarine blue and a phthalo blue at the very least in your collection so that you can mix a variety of different colors. So let's try those first. I'll put them out here to show you what they look like first. So this is a Quinacridone Magenta, and you can see I've just grabbed some from my palette because it's M. Graham made with honey and because it's a professional paint. You can grab it and get a really intense color straight. Go back into my yellow with a dirty brush, but if I go back into the blue or the magenta, it's going to be really easy to clean that up later. Now I haven't got much, there's not much water with that, and I'm going to put that on full strength. Try and keep it over away from my mixing area. So that's full strength, and you can see it's a pretty dark color. If I wanted it darker, I would just keep going, adding more and more rich color, lots of blue in there. Let's see if I can get that a little bit darker. It'll be a little bit more of a blue black if I add a bit more blue, and I could go back and get a bit more yellow. I just didn't want to get it too dirty, but I will wash my brush if I'm going back in the yellow because I don't want to get my yellow really, really muddied up. So that's with a bit more yellow. Now, of course, if you wanted it a bit deeper, you'd go for a second layer. Sorry, I got a little bit of light on there. I need light so you can see what I'm doing, but I don't want to glare, so let's bring it down a little bit. If I add some water to that, bring a bit of water over, get one of my nice brushes. I don't like painting with the cheap brushes, but they're great for mixing. So if I've added a bit of water to that black that I've made, I can get a lovely, lovely, subtle, beautiful, subtle gray color. Absolutely gorgeous, subtle gray color. Looks very pretty. And of course, depending on how much water you add, you can get the subtlest of grays, or you can get a really deep, deep black color. So that's a really good one. It's transparent, non-granulating. You don't have any granulating colors in there, and nice and intense. Those three are intense colors. They're not pale colors. If you want a pale gray, then you'd use your pale colors. Now, of course, a green is going to have the yellow and blue already in there. So when you have a green and a magenta, I'm going to do phthalo green and quinacridone magenta. It's like doing red, yellow, and blue, except that you start with I'm going to clean that up. You start with the mix, but the reason phthalo green is so wonderful for mixing is that it's a very, very transparent and intense color. No granulation with this color. Look at it. It's just gorgeous. And again, I'm not gonna wash my brush because I don't want to get any water in that mix. I want it nice and intense because I could squeeze it out the tube too. It's another way to get it intense. I need a bit more magenta added to that. It's a little bit too green still. Let's add a bit more magenta. Don't forget, if your color doesn't come out right first time, and test it, test your color, and just add a little bit more of something else. you know, just add a little bit more red or a little bit more blue or a little bit more green. I could even add to this another color. I won't because I'm doing a test strip, but if I was actually painting and I wanted that a little bit more blue, I would add a bit of blue. Or if I wanted it a little bit more brown, I maybe add sepia or something. Again, I can add some water to that and take it down to a lovely, lovely gray. If I add a bit more magenta, I'll have a what's called a warm gray, almost a violet sort of gray. And if I added a bit more green, I'd have a very cool gray. I haven't left much room for a cool gray, have I? Let's bung it in there. And I'm using my cheap paper to do this on. We'll switch to the good paper so you can see it better. The colors are going to look different. If you've got a really good cotton paper, your colors are going to look more intense and less washed out. The cheaper the paper, the worse the colors look. So be aware of that. If yours are not looking the same as mine and you have a very cheap pulp paper, that just could be the reason. Right, the next one is Ultramarine Blue and Burnt Sienna. This is literally my most favorite gray that I ever use. And I don't know why it's I think it's a lot of people's favorite because it's such a workhorse. You can make it into so many colors. You can make it into a gray, you can make it into a dark brown. You don't have to buy a variety of browns or grays. Just got to get my burnt sienna. Now, I usually have M. Graham paint, but they use a different formula for their burnt sienna, and I like the formula that's used by Winsor and Newton for the burnt sienna, which is PR 101. I prefer that to the brown one that M. Graham and Daniel Smith use. So we've got a lovely dark color there. And even though they are granulating paints, they're not, you know, they don't granulate too badly. Let's zoom in a little bit on that. I just find that they're forgiving. They don't stain. These other two blacks that I've mixed, they will stain your paper and be very difficult to lift. You can lift these two colors. You can lift them out. You can lift highlights from them. You can wash them out if they haven't worked for you. See, I'm already mixing with my good brush because I prefer painting with it. And then, of course, you can water it down for light gray. You can add more blue for a more blue gray. You can add more brown for a very sort of neutral brown rather than the warm brown that you get from burnt sienna. You can get probably 1,000 or more colors from these two colors, just mixing them, watering them down, making them thick. They are just beautiful colors. And let's see if I've got one here that I've done. I do have one here. And I'll show you what I mean about being able to wash them back. I need a fairly stiff brush. I often use an acrylic or oil brush to wash back. See, if I take a stiff brush and I agitate that a little bit, get a paper towel, I can wash that which is PR 101, is a very orangey clear, probably warmer burnt sienna, and does not as granulate as much as the ones that have the BR7, B7 rather, such as Daniel Smith and M. Graham. Nothing wrong with them. I just prefer this one because it doesn't granulate as much. Now, Perylene Maroon is a very, very deep, intense color. I just bought some from M. Graham. It's almost like wine, like Merlot or something. Gorgeous, gorgeous, deep, deep red. And then it's transparent, of course, and phthalo blue because it's transparent and intense. If you want dark colors, you need to pick your intense ones out of your colors that you have. If you don't have these, you need to look through for something similar that's a nice, deep, intense color. You're not going to get black with your wishy-washy colors or slightly opaque colors. You'll get nice grays, but you won't get a deep color. So let's try. Perylene Maroon is one of my new favorites, actually. I'm just started to really find uses for it. Let's clean. I don't usually clean my palette up, but I want you to at least have a nice clean mixing surface to watch. So I'm putting that out. It's almost like deep blood red, that Perylene Maroon. Gorgeous. And we're going to put some phthalo blue with it. So really just two primary colors, but they still quickly, very quickly make a nice dark color. You can get a little bit more of each without washing my brush, because the less water I put with this, the darker it's going to be and more interesting. Oh, that's a gorgeous color. So quick. Like any of you who've struggled to get dark colors, it can be really quick with these good quality intense colors. I'm adding a lot of water to this now, so I can make a makes a really neutral, very neutral gray. Of course, if you want to change it up, you add a little bit more of another color, a little bit more of the blue, changes it to a much cooler gray, and then a bit more of the these colors are so intense, you only have to add. And that's a little bit, I didn't finish my sentence because I wanted to start another sentence, which is, if you're worried about spending a lot of money on artist quality paints, you're actually saving quite a bit of money because you use hardly any paint at all to get some color. You don't need much paint. And I prefer mine squeezed into a palette because they last much, much longer. You don't waste paint that gets washed away or gets over mixed. You use just the right amount. So for this last one, I'm going to use phthalo green on this page anyway. And then I'm going to use some alizarin crimson. Now, I don't use alizarin crimson hardly anymore. They have come out now with some more permanent ones. And it is a lovely color, lovely cool red. Look at those two. But I was worried about the permanence of it, because it is a fugitive. The old alizarin crimson was quite fugitive, which means it will fade, and your pink and your alizarin will go white over time. The UV rays from sunlight and daylight will eventually fade them. But some of the manufacturers have come up with a new formula, which is called permanent alizarin crimson. So if you use that, you're going to be okay. But now a lot of the quinacridone reds and quinacridone pinks are a much better substitution. So think about that when you're buying your paint. If you have student grade paint, it's quite likely that it might be a fugitive one that will fade. So let's go back to the, this was the one I used to use before I discovered the Perylene Maroon, because it's kind of similar but not quite as intense. So I'm going to add the alizarin crimson to the phthalo green, and well, I have a little bit more crimson needed. It's still a bit green, and that's the thing, you need to test and then say, do I need more, do I need less? So that's pretty dark, look. And then I'm adding water. Now that's fairly greenish, so I'm going to add a little bit more crimson, and water it down. Water it down a little bit more. Yeah. Now, I would say these are some of the best mixes to use if you want some good darks. You don't have to stop with just those two colors. You can add, I often add sepia to make it a little bit more brown or a little bit more opaque. But you have to remember that every time you add another color, you're going to get more muddy. And if you add a color that is slightly opaque or semi-opaque, it's going to get muddy quicker because you've got other colors in there. If you water them down, however, you can get a lovely, lovely range of colors. So don't worry too much. For the Schaefer fountain pen ink, and fountain pen inks are never waterproof, which sometimes is good because you can actually watercolor with them. You know, you can add water. This is, you know, at least 2 or 3 weeks ago I did this. Again, Parker Quink that you put in a fountain pen. You can't usually put waterproof ink in a fountain pen because it blocks them up and you can never use them again. So you need to have a non-waterproof ink. I use a dip pen with the other ones. One of my favorites, and it surprised me, I ground an ink stick that was made in Japan on a stone, only for a few minutes, and made black ink. And it was actually a very nice, very flat backing. And it is fairly waterproof now, and you can definitely dilute it with water. Ranger make distress oxide, and this is black soot, and it is meant to be mixed with water. A couple that I really like, Raw Talons make Ecoline watercolor inks, and this is their warm gray and this is their cool gray, and they're meant to be used like watercolors, but they are not light fast. So you need to be aware that if you're doing it in a little journal, it's okay because the light's not going to get to your journal. Your inks will be okay. But if you're doing it to frame and put on the wall, it won't be long before these beautiful, vibrant ink colors just fade away. So it's a really important thing to think about when you're spending your money on paint or ink. You can also buy watercolor inks by Dr. P.H. Martin's, and they are light fast, but they're more expensive. You usually get what you pay for, but the expensive ones last a lot longer. Now, let me have a look at some paints. Everything you wanted to know about black in one place. I tried out all the blacks I could find in my supplies, including my inks. So lamp black, Winsor Newton Cotman. I've had this tube for years and years and years because they always put a tube of black and a tube of white in. I never use it. But you know what? It was not bad. This is on Arches paper, Arches 140-pound cold press. It came out really nice and flat and opaque, and it diluted really nicely. I didn't have too much trouble with that one, and I was surprised. I thought it was quite good quality. Payne's Grey by M. Graham. Of course, Payne's Grey is always your go-to if you want something dark. My favorite of everything that I tested was this flat black acrylic by Golden. It's a new product. They've just come out with it, and they have flat acrylic paints that do not shine at all. That was always the thing about acrylic paints. It would shine, it would look different to watercolor. And this is PBK 7, and it is totally waterproof. You can dilute it down, and when you use it on paper, it looks exactly like watercolor. You don't see any difference. And it came out lovely and flat and opaque and waterproof. So that if I was going to do black now on anything that I wanted a really, really flat black waterproof finish, I would use the acrylic Golden. I was given a little sample of it, which I have somewhere here. I can't see it at the moment, but fabulous. Neutral Tint by Daniel Smith. That's a much warmer one than Payne's Grey, but again, it's a good one. Koi paints, they're okay for children and beginners. They're very chalky. There's a lot of chalk in them. This is very, very granular, not very flat and not very opaque. I just happen to have a set of those. I've had them for a long time. Now, I bought this oxide black, Van Gogh Royal Talons, because it's highly granulating, and you can mix it with other colors to make beautiful granulating colors that are dark. And I just bought it to play with, basically. So I think Lunar Black from Daniel Smith is a very similar formula. It's highly granulating too. So if you want to play with that and mix, say, a purple with that and get this dark granulating purple, that's kind of fun. Gouache. Gouache is more opaque, and this is by Lucas. It's ivory black gouache. Of course, gouache can be mixed with water. It's considered by most to be a watercolor because you just mix it with water, and it can be reconstituted. And this is ivory black, PBK 7 and PBK 9, a mixture. Not bad, but I wouldn't use it. And then there's black tourmaline, genuine, by Daniel Smith. That means they've used a mineral, and there is no light fast ratings on the minerals. They are just, and it's not very black. So those are some blacks you can just buy if you wanted to. So this is going to be my reference chart. So these are some of the ones I've just showed you. I just showed you how to mix these ones here. So let's have a look at these ones on this side. And just want to zoom in so you can see properly. So this one's going to be ultramarine blue, sepia, and cadmium red. We're going to see what we can get with those three colors. You can just, experiment. You can experiment. So ultramarine blue. I tend to go for the blue first, even though I tell you go for yellow first. I did get a bit more water on my brush, and I am mixing with my best brush, which you shouldn't do, but your brush gets loaded up with color when you're mixing. So cadmium red. I am going to have a little bit of a clean and grab some cadmium red. I don't use cadmium red much anymore. I'm going to switch to one of the Quinacridones, but I'm not going to throw away what I have in my palette. I'll use it till it's all gone. And what did I say? Sepia, ultramarine blue, and cadmium red. Sepia is a very, very cool dark brown. So let's see what that looks like when we've mixed those three. Yeah, we get a pretty good pretty good neutral color. I'm gonna add a little bit of water to that so I get like a medium dilution. And then I'm going to add quite a bit of water to get more water than that. Very light one. And this is on proper paper. And so I can get a really good idea of what they look like if I use good quality paper. And I'm going to keep this. This is going to be my nice reference chart. So I want to see what they look like. Second one we're going to try is Phthalo Green and Perylene Maroon. I already did that one. I won't put it on here. I'll do that another time. Cadmium Red, Azo Yellow, Ultramarine Blue. So 3 primary colors. And remember, start with yellow because you don't want to make your yellow messy. So start with yellow, and then we're going to get some Cadmium Red, which is already messy. I just clean them off with a clean paintbrush when I'm finished, if they get a bit messy. And then Ultramarine Blue, I never mind. It always cleans up really easily. So we've got a red, yellow, and blue that's not as... I need a bit more red in that. It's not as transparent as some of the other ones I showed you. It's going to be more opaque, more likely to make mud, but it's still red, yellow, and blue. And it's still not too bad. Your ultramarine, of course, is granulating. Your cadmium red sort of semi-transparent. And the azo yellow is pretty transparent. That's why I like it. But look, I've put it in the wrong one. It's supposed to go down here. I'll have to redo that one. But it's not bad. Let's put it down here properly, and then I'll stick something over that one. What you do when you're talking and you're not concentrating on what you're doing. So I'll put this in the right place. What I do is I just stick a bit of paper over it and fix it later. Of course, I have got a bit of water in there, so that's not quite as dark, but still fairly dark. Still looking okay. Sepia is a great one for helping to darken these colors up. Let's have a look at this one. This one's going to be Quinacridone Magenta, Prussian Blue. Oh, Prussian Blue is a good one. And Sepia. The Prussian, look at that purple. Can you see that purple I get with the Prussian? And then some Sepia. If you want a good black, always add plenty of blue. Or grey, if you want a good grey. Don't forget to add lots of blue and not much water. I'm not dipping in my water here. So this is, I put quite a lot of blue in here. And I do believe, I haven't looked up the Prussian pigments, but I do believe it has some black already in it when they mix it. That's a really good dark one. And then dilute it down a little bit for the medium. And dilute it down a lot for the light. Dilute it down even more. There we go. And last one on this page is going to be Quinacridone Rose. Pull this over. I love Quinacridone Rose. If you use Winsor & Newton paints, Quinacridone Rose is called Permanent Rose by Winsor & Newton, but it's still the same formula, and I've tested it against Daniel Smith, and I prefer the Winsor & Newton. It always seems clearer, but other people will disagree with me, so some of those things are just personal choice. Mix that with ultramarine blue and you get the most delicious purple you've ever seen. And I'm also going to use some sepia. So if you don't have Quinacridone Magenta, you can use Quinacridone Rose. It's still quite a strong color. And if you add a little bit of something else, it will still get a deep color. So I've got... You can keep going in the blue. If it looks too purple or too pink, you can keep going in the blue until you get get something that's much, much darker. It will look a bit like purple on your palette, but you put it on some paper and suddenly it goes very black. There, no, it does look a little lilac when you put a bit of water with it. Look at this variety of neutrals here. That's why I love to mix them. You can't get that variety with a black out of a tube. All you get when you get a black out of a tube is a flat black. And if you look at a crow or any other animal or thing in nature that's black, it's not just black. Right, what I want to talk about now is soft grey, because these are all neutrals we're talking about, really, not exactly black. We're just saying black, but what we're making is some neutrals. If you want to make a lovely, lovely soft grey, my favourite is cobalt blue. Cobalt because it's a much gentler, softer, not as intense blue. It's similar to ultramarine blue, but it's a little bit less intense. So we're going to use that. This is my favourite grey. A little bit of quinacridone rose, or like I say, it's also called permanent rose, and a little bit of raw sienna. And again, you have to watch the raw siennas because some of them are made with the brown pigment and some are made with the yellow pigment. I forget which yellow pigment it is, but I prefer the raw sienna that's made with the yellowish pigment. And now I'm going to get a lovely, lovely soft brown, not brown. I could get a brown with that, but I like the grays. This is a beautiful, because all these colors are very soft. So if you want something like soft stone or tarmac or something very soft gray, these three colors are excellent for that. And of course you can add them in different ratios. If I was to add a lot more, I'm going to add a lot more raw sienna with that and put it on another piece of paper so you can see. If I add a lot of raw sienna with that, we're going to get a very sandstony sort of gray, something that looks like sandstone. But if I add a lot more blue to that, we're going to get a more bluey colored rock. So you could paint a whole painting of rocks with these three colors, adding water to make the rocks lighter, adding blue to make the rocks bluer, adding pink or rose to make them a little bit warmer. Imagine how many rocks you could paint with these three colors and different intensities of these three colors. They are just gorgeous. If you don't have raw sienna, you can use yellow ochre. It's very similar. I just prefer the raw siennas that I buy because they're more transparent. Next one, quinacridone rose, yellow ochre. I am going to use yellow ochre. And a bit of quinacridone rose. Makes a lovely sort of orange color. And then some ultramarine. Going to get a bit more intense of color because the ultramarine is more intense. So your gray will be much more intense. And again, I can go back and forth between those colors to just adjust it a little bit and make it less blue or more yellow or more rosy. I'm just going to do one more. I'm going to do lots on my own, but just one more for you before we go, because you're probably either going to sleep by now or wanting to get off and make your own blacks and grays. So the last one I'm going to do is ultramarine blue, my favorite, burnt sienna, and a little bit of quinacridone rose to warm up the gray. So let's start with a little bit of rose. And ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna. I've tried a lot of burnt siennas in different brands, and I love the Winsor & Newton one, and that's just me. Not everybody loves the same brands for the same reasons. So just You know, I'm not advocating anything in particular, just telling you what my preferences are. So it's very similar to the previous one with the burnt sienna rather than the yellow ochre, but you can make it a little bit more intense if you need to, a little bit darker. There. And I will go on mixing colors, and you can go on trying out colors. I think it's a wonderful thing to do. If you don't know what to paint, if you just are stuck for something to do and you want a little project to do, mix some neutrals, make a whole little. I've just taken a few pieces of paper, put a hole through them, and I've made myself a little thing to give me a reference tool. You can do this for greens, you can mix a bunch of greens, you can do this for browns, you can do this for oranges, and have yourself some little reference tools so you don't forget what you've mixed and which ones you like the most. So that's going to be me for today, and give you a little project if you're having those after Christmas January blues and you don't know what to paint. Just try out mixing some colors. It can be fun. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.